Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DAWX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Gavroshe, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. We're starting this session just a touch late because we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties, but it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Derek Strauss, who also runs a pretty good CDO class on his spare time. Derek has had a number of leadership positions in data over the years, and we're looking very much forward to his chat where he's going to talk specifically around some of the things that he's been working towards here. And he's got a scenario for us, the data commons, a tragedy or a comedy. And I had to read the abstract a couple times here, but I think I know what you're getting at. And it's something around critical mass, right, Derek?
Perhaps critical mass, but certainly critical something.
Critical something, right. Well, if there's anybody in a position to tell us about that, it is Derek Strauss. So Derek, I'll let you get started with this. Let me just explain to everybody else the technical difficulties are arising from his slides. And we're hoping that somebody will be popping on here in a minute to add to his slides. So the slides will kind of come up behind him. But anyway, Derek, please go right ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. And certainly if we don't get the slides will be made available afterwards. So watch out for them, maybe through email or whatever. Great to have this opportunity to talk to a bunch of people who are passionate about data and analytics. Anytime I get that opportunity, I'm in my element. So this is a good day for me. What I'd like to do is to start off by kind of transporting you to the banks of the Thames River in London and the Globe Theatre. And we're standing outside the Globe Theatre, and we've heard that there's a new play that has been written by William Shakespeare, and it's called The Predicament of the Data Commons. And we're wondering, is this a tragedy or is this a comedy? Is this a tragedy or is this a comedy? And so we go inside the Globe Theatre and we start looking at the lineup for the play, and we see that there's a number of items that we're going to be looking at. We see that there's going to be some mention of tragedy, some of comedy, and then we're going to start looking at something about governing the commons, and there's going to be something about systems thinking. The plot thickens. Then we're going to ask you to give us your opinion on a couple of things. And we're going to look at hard, soft, or development considerations. And finally, we'll end up thinking about the good old English term, horses for courses. Well, hopefully that stimulated a little bit of imagination for you, but let's just jump right into this. Tragedy or comedy? You take Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is a wonderful romance story, but in the end, it's just utterly depressing, isn't it? It's a tragedy. Nobody wins. The hero and the heroine both die. And it's quite depressing. Comedies, on the other hand, very many different comedies that Shakespeare wrote. Of course, one of them would be Midsummer Night's Dream. And the thing with comedies is everyone enjoys them. Everyone is laughing. Everyone benefits from them. And so there's all-round benefit. It's a positive scenario as opposed to the tragedy, which really ends in an awfully negative scenario. Well, what happens with your data? Is your data more a comedy or a tragedy? Now, I don't mean a comedy in terms of everyone's laughing at it and thinking it's ridiculous. I mean a comedy in terms of the effect that it has on everyone in the organization. Everyone is happy with it. Everyone is jovial about the fact that they have such wonderful data to work with. And everything is working swimmingly around the data. So what is it? Are you in that happy state, or are you depressed? Well, where does tragedy of the commons come from in the first place? It comes out of an essay that was written by a British economist, William Foster Lloyd, in 1833, where he looked at a hypothetical example of the effects of unregulated grazing of cattle on common land in Great Britain and in Ireland. 100 years later, an American biologist and philosopher, Garrett Hardin, in 1968, picked it up and actually coined the phrase, the tragedy of the commons, basically describing a situation in a shared resource system where individual users actively and independently acting in those areas based on their self-interest behave contrary to the overall good of the resource. And the resource gets depleted, the resource is ultimately unusable by anyone. The concept of tragedy of the commons has been not only used in environmental science and economics, but also anthropology, game theory, politics, taxation, sociology. So why not data? Let's use it in data, shall we? Let's use it in data. But let's look at the flip side of the coin. Is it all tragedy, or is there some comedy? Is there some comedy that we can look forward to? Well, in 1986, Carol Rose took the tragedy of the commons and decided that she was going to look at the flip side of the coin. And what she found by looking at commercial platforms was that the more people that used the resource, the higher the benefit to each one. So she said, you know, the commons can ultimately result in a situation where we have the more the merrier, the more the merrier. And the conclusion that Carol Rose came to was that public resources may suffer from underinvestment rather than negligent or ignorant overuse. Now, that was a very interesting twist on the overall thinking around the tragedy of the commons. So, you know, we're looking at all these great thinkers and philosophers and researchers that have come up with these ideas. Let's segue quickly to another great thinker, Captain Jack Sparrow. Captain Jack Sparrow said, "The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Do you understand?" Well, if we think about a practical example that follows up on how do we think about this? Do we think about it from a positive perspective? Do you think about your data positively? Does your organizational culture think about data positively? Or does it think about it negatively? Well, here's an example. Some years back, we were asked to go into a financial services firm to help them with their data resource. What we found was that they had two central databases accounting for over 4 petabytes. And the names of these two databases were JKOF and JTOF. Now, the names have actually been changed to protect the confidentiality of it, but just play along with me for a moment. So JKOF and JTOF, and of course, me being a semantics person, a data person, I wanted to know what they meant. What do these acronyms stand for? And they told me that JKOF stands for junk kept on file, and JTOF was junk taken off the file. And I must admit, I was a bit taken aback. the conclusion I came to is that they had a fundamentally negative approach to their data. They thought of it as junk. And I actually told the senior management when I opened my findings discussion with them, the problem with your data is not your data. The problem is the way you think about the data. Essentially mimicking Jack Sparrow's deep thinkings about this. Because basically, they didn't value their data. There was meager investment in data capabilities and data management capabilities. They'd had no data inventory, no data ownership, no data governance, and no data architecture. They had these enormous files they were just piling junk into. Does that describe in any way the company culture that you find yourself in? Well, there's good news. Really picking up on the positive side of things with the comedy of the commons and applying this to economics initially. Elinor Ostrom in 1990 got involved in a lot of research which focused on environmental aspects, but also specifically the economic side of environmental aspects. And she wrote a book called Governing the Commons, where she demonstrated how communities were very successful looking after the commons for the common good without top-down regulations or privatization taking place. And she got a Nobel Prize in economics in 2009. Another notable person is Peter Senge. I'm sure most of us know his works. The Fifth Discipline being one of the most noteworthy books that he put together. And Peter Senge said in 1990, and also republished his book in 2006, that managing the commons needs to happen either through educating everyone and creating forms of self-regulation and peer pressure, or through official regulating mechanisms, ideally designed by the participants or the stakeholders. What does this tell us? It tells us that we need to invest in education and organizational change management, as well as systems and technology. Now, if you think of our Chief Data Officer community, are we investing in systems and technology? I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. It's a resounding yes. And I see we have the slides. Wonderful, thank you. So if we're doing all of this wonderful investment in systems and technology, the question is, are we also doing investment in education and organizational change management? If you think back to the survey that New Vantage Partners did at the end of last year, there were some staggering statistics there in terms of the amount of investment that goes into AI, machine learning, big data, etc. It's a staggering amount. And yet that same survey also showed that we as a community are not being terribly successful when it comes to building a data culture. Well, what is a data culture at the end of the day? A data culture is the way we do things around here, right? That's what a culture is, the way we do things around here. And are we doing things around here based on data and analytics? Are we a data-driven company? Is our culture changed to the point where it is a data-driven culture? And if not, are we actually investing in education and organizational change management, or are we simply investing in systems and technology? Interesting question. Interesting question, one that I'd love to get your thoughts on. So let's go to the next slide, please. This is the poll, and I'd love your input from this. I think the polling capability has been set up with this. If not, hopefully it will be sometime during the course of this, this session. But in essence, I'm asking you, how are you governing your critical data? Are you doing data education at all levels of the organization? Are you creating forms of self-regulation and peer pressure to look after your data as a corporate resource, as a valued corporate resource? Are you setting up official regulating mechanisms designed collaboratively by the participants and the stakeholders? Or are you, in essence, creating these official regulating mechanisms by imposition from top-down management directives? Or how are you doing it? Is there some other way, perhaps? Please check all that apply. And we'll see where this comes out, and I'll certainly share the results with those attending. Let's go to the next slide. So back to my question. Are we spending money on education and OCM? Or are we only spending money on systems and technology? If you think through these 7 streams here, and this is simply the approach that we typically use when we're implementing a data and analytics transformation program in an organization. So, you know, you could substitute for these 7 streams whatever approach it is that you like the most. But let's just use this as an example. If we're trying to implement, you know, a data governance capability, certainly we need systems and technology components to it. But we also are fundamentally changing the way we do things around here. We're adding new roles. We're adding data owners, data stewards, etc. That requires education. That requires OCM effort. Are we taking the time and spending the money on doing that, the education and the OCM? Likewise, data architecture. Are we really thinking through the architecture? Or are we just slapping data stores in willy-nilly? Are we creating some more JTOFs and JKOFs, treating our data like junk? Or are we really carefully, thoughtfully creating an architecture that is going to be flexible and that's going to take us into the future? Well, what does that require? Education, organizational change management. It's a change in the way we do things, yes? The same for each one of these. We could honestly go through every single one of these streams of activities, and we could say the same thing. There's certainly a systems and technology component, but there's also very much an education and an OCM. And my proposal to you is the fact that we as a community of chief data officers and data and analytics leaders have been so limited in our success in creating a data culture is because we've spent so much time and effort on systems and technology and virtually none on education and organizational change management. That's my proposal to you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around that. So feel free to contact me, let me know what your thoughts are. Now, let's continue to the next slide. So we've got roughly 15 minutes left here. I'm going to try and speed through some of these next slides. But in essence, this slide here tries to show, you know, what is the core of data culture? What is data culture all about? It's an organizational culture concept. And if we go to the middle of this slide here, you can see that we're looking at core OC concepts, and OC simply stands for organizational culture. The way we do things around here. Well, consists of three main components. It consists of deeply held basic assumptions and beliefs. It consists of explicit statements of values. What is it that we value? And then it consists of company practices and behaviors. So the way we do things, the behaviors that we have, are because of what we value, and that is because of what we believe. Now, what do we believe about our data? That previous example I gave you, they believed their data was junk. Well, what's that going to mean in terms of behavior? You're not going to change the behavior until you can change the belief. And then, of course, the values need to be made explicit. You know, what is it that we as an organization value in terms of data? Now, of course, around the core concepts of organizational culture, you have the climate in which the organization exists. So you've got changing political, social, religious, and economic factors. Those influence the beliefs and assumptions and the values. You've got cultural influences over on the left, generational capabilities and competencies, professional group cultures and national cultures. Those all affect beliefs and assumptions and values. You've got the internal environment of the organization, the actual physical environment, the office building, or the dispersed workforce as we all are now through Zoom and Teams. The systems, strategies, styles of management, organizational structures, power structures, all of these things also affect assumptions, beliefs, and values, and ultimately then the behaviors. And then you've got the external environment, the things the organization does to the external environment, and the feedback loop from the external environment onto our organization and its assumptions, beliefs, values, and behaviors. So this kind of describes the full comprehensive picture of organizational culture. And it's a dynamic picture. But if we're going to change the culture from a data perspective, if we're going to be able to move from tragedy to comedy, where everyone starts really benefiting from the data, we're going to have to address these central concepts of organizational culture. We're going to have to address assumptions, beliefs, values, and behaviors. Let's move to the next slide. So the next couple of slides are really a couple of ways of trying to classify your data problems and your data strategy that you could employ to address some of the problems. And this is based on a number of theorists and researchers that have come up with this. This particular slide is based on the work of Senior and Swales in 2016, where they said, essentially problems are either difficult problems or messy problems. There's no such thing as an easy problem in their book. And I think most of us would certainly agree when it comes to trying to move the data and analytics agenda forward in the organizations in which we work. There are difficult problems and there are messy problems. Now, the difficult problems are problems essentially, and I'm not going to read through every single one of these here. It's available in the slides for you to look at. But, in summary, difficult problems are those which you can essentially get your arms around. They're bounded, and there's very little involvement, of people. There's not all the complicated aspects of different people with different opinions and different agendas. There's relatively few people that got the same agenda, and it's all systems go from the people side. And all that you're really having to focus on is technology and systems. On the messy side of it, it's the complete opposite. It's where everyone and his mother is, shouting the odds about this. And it's an ill-defined problem. It's often a problem that's been in the organization for decades. No one's solved it. There are a lot of dead bodies lying all over the organization of people that have tried to solve it. It's a major issue. Now, I ask you, if you think of your data, specifically your critical data, which category do you think it more likely falls into? I would guess that a lot of us would be pretty accurate by saying that it's going to be the soft, messy, unbounded world that we live in. The soft, messy, unbounded world. Let's have the next slide. So Patton and McCalman in 2000 came up with what they called the Tropics Test, where you look at timescales, resources, objectives, perceptions, interest, control, and source. And again, you try and say, is this a hard or a soft scenario? And again, we're not going to go through every single line here. Suffice to say that the hard lines up with the difficult on the previous slide, and the soft lines up with the messy. It's a good way of starting to think about where does your data fall. Now, the next slide, let's just jump to the next slide, basically picks up on this theme and says, if it's a hard situation, in other words, if it's difficult, in other words, if it's bounded, you can get your arms around it and there are not too many human beings involved. And the human beings that are involved are pretty much in consensus about the problem and how to fix it. Well, then it's a pretty simple way that you can fix it. You can implement a hard systems model of change, which is basically 3 phases: describe the problem, list out what the options are and select one, and then implement it. Whoopee, the hard systems model of change done. We're all happy, and away we go, skipping down the road with rainbows in the distance. Well, the HSMC model is not terribly useful when it comes to data and analytics, so it turns out. Let's jump to the next slide. This one, the organizational development approach, tends to be a lot more useful because it has a lot more organizational change management and education component to it. We're not going to spend a lot of time going through every single piece of it, but if you want to check it out, Senior and Swales 2016 are the ones that essentially put this together, borrowing elements from Kotter. I'm sure most of us have read John Kotter's book on leading change. Patton and McCalman and Buchanan McCalman also had works in this area that Senior and Swales used. So it's a nice summary. There's a lot of emphasis here on focus around the education and organizational change management capabilities. So the next slide. Bottom line is my question to you all. Are we using the right horse for the right course? If we take the Tropics Test, and if we're entirely honest with ourselves, if it is a soft scenario that we're working with, in other words, a messy scenario, an unbounded scenario, and as far as I'm concerned, a data and analytics typical scenario, then probably we should be adopting an organizational development approach, which implies a great deal of investment in education and organizational change management. If, on the other hand, we find ourselves in the amazing situation where we have a hard or difficult scenario after the Tropics Test, then by all means use the hard systems model of change. But I would submit to you that a lot of our problems in the Chief Data Officer and the leadership of data and analytics programs comes from the fact that we are in a soft situation. We're in a messy situation. And we're trying to use a hard systems model of change. And we're going from tragedy to tragedy instead of tragedy to comedy. Just one man's opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please let me know what you're thinking. I see we've only got 3 minutes left. Unfortunately, we started a little late, but I'm happy to take questions now, or you can email me.
There's several of them actually in the chat. So yeah, let's, well, we've got a minute or two to try it. How often have you seen organizational change management as part of the CDO office or matrixed from another part of the enterprise?
Not enough. I've seen it in 1 or 2 situations, but you know, I've advocated for it wherever I've gone, but I just don't believe people, you know, spend enough time thinking about that. I've been very fortunate in all of the work that I've done. I've tended to, in situations where there wasn't a formal OCM approach, I've just been lucky because I've, you know, lurched uncontrollably into the truth through no, you know, brilliance of mine. Our situations just fell into place for me. But, you know, as one gets, you know, deeper and deeper experience in these things and casts your mind back and starts getting 2020 hindsight in the year 2020, one starts to really think about, you know, we should really take a more deliberate approach to OCM and education.
I think everybody on the call agrees. There's several anonymous on here. Let me read one more quick question into, or maybe it's just a comment, but great presentation, Jarek. I loved your JKOF and JTOF analogy. Very well said. It's our attitude towards the data and the data itself that matters. So again,
great.
Obviously, you had some nerves out there. This is one of the sad things about this event is we can't meet in the hallways. But as you said, Derek, you're happy to have people reach out. And will you be boosting at this event? I forget on there. I know you're certainly sponsoring.
Yes, yes, yeah. So swing by the Gavroshe booth.
Many opportunities. Well, again, Derek, this is a conversation, as you said, that we're not done with. But perhaps one of the things we can do as CDO is to pick this up as a thread and try to tease it forward. So look for something coming from us at this point. And hopefully we can get our heads together and try to push it forward.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody. So we're actually just going to take a quick 5-minute break. All right, thank you. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties at the start that gave you a rough head into it, but you are so experienced, it was no problem at all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.